In the memoir, The Last Goodnights, John West revealed for the first time a secret which he had kept from everyone, including his two sisters, for 10 years. West helped each of his terminally ill parents commit suicide, a crime in the state of California where the deaths took place. West says that he acted out of love and, if given the choice, would do it again. He says, "I really didn't have sleepless nights over it because it seemed like the right thing to do. It was what my parents wanted." John West has been the managing partner and owner of 2 law firms, practiced civil rights and employment law, and worked as a public defender. He's currently in the process of preparing an intense lobbying effort in various state legislatures where issues of patients' rights, especially death with dignity, are being debated and decided. The Last Goodnights Organization is the support arm for his efforts in this regard, and The Last Goodnights is his first book. Welcome, John West.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Okay. Now, what I want to do in this half hour is spend most of our time together telling your personal story, because I realize this is a unique experience. Most listeners will never likely have this opportunity to hear this. And as you take us through it, this happened, then this happened, I'll stop every now and then and ask you 2 other questions. You know, what's your reflection? What does it mean?
Right.
And what were your feelings? But I want you just to, tell the story. And before you start, I've written screenplays, and you may have too. I believe an important question is, what was the character doing before the movie started? What would the character do if there were no movie? In other words, had your father not asked this of you and your mother, what was your life? What would those 2 years have been?
Well, I was going along sort of blithely minding my own business, enjoying life, practicing law in Seattle, enjoying my friends and my cats and my garden and, just having a regular life. My parents were very public service-oriented people, and that was always part of my character as well. So when they did ask me, it really was kind of a combination of everything that I had been raised to believe in. First of all, helping people who need help, and doing the right thing as opposed to what society might say isn't popular at the moment. So I have often thought about if this hadn't happened, let's say they were still alive, I'd be coming down to L.A. to visit them instead of now having moved here to change my life around a little bit. But it would have been very different. Much more peaceful, much less stressful. I probably would live 10 years longer because what I had to go through took a lot out of me, as it would take a lot out of anyone. And that brings me back to something you said earlier. A surprising number of people have gone through this. Not only doctors, but friends, family, neighbors have been called upon and have agreed to assist their parents, sisters, siblings, neighbors, friends, end their lives, but it's not talked about.
Well, I'm just realizing, you didn't share it with your sisters for 10 years. So it's not only doesn't the public know, perhaps they're the only ones who know, but because you've put this out, they then reach out to you.
Right. It's funny because as I was preparing my book, as I was writing the book, sort of reaching out in subtle ways here and there, stealthy ways, I discovered, actually I read this in the paper, I guess that wasn't too stealthy, a reporter had written about a group that met in secret that were people who had assisted loved ones with suicides, and it was sort of like a support group. And I thought, wow, it's a good thing that they have that. Because coming from a mental health background, my parents were both in the mental health field, I knew because I was experiencing it, when you keep a very important secret, it's very hard on your psyche. And you need to get counseling. You need to have someone to talk to about this. And that's another part of the big reason that this whole thing has to change. It has to be not illegal. It has to be legal like it is in Oregon and Washington and now Montana between a patient and a doctor. And you need to not force family and friends and loved ones to do this very, very difficult task and keep it secret. It's very hard.
Yeah, as I said, I want to revert back to the beginning, but I will add this one thing before we do, and that is that what occurs to me is there's a moment when you're close to, it's the night I think you're helping your mother.
Right. And
you've already helped your father. Your relationship with your mother is warmer, closer, etc. And I realize that you are having to shift your focus back and forth from these are my last moments with my mother to I'm doing something that I've got to be very responsible about to I'm doing something which is dangerous to, and it just struck me as that shouldn't have to happen.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, you want your last time with your loved ones, in this case it was me and my parents, you want your last weeks, months, days, hours, minutes to be as loving and as supportive as possible. Instead, I was forced into stealth mode and planning and skulking around and scheming and plotting and covering my tracks and just trying to make sure that all the technical details were taken care of. And I realized this is why doctors, surgeons are not allowed to operate on family members, for example. It's so hard to separate out the technical things you have to do from the emotional things. And this is why a lot of soldiers have, what we're coming to understand much more these days, post-traumatic stress. They have had to do something incredibly hard, very emotional, difficult, but they've had to be efficient and functional in order to keep alive. So it
stays. I mean, I've actually written a book on trauma and post-traumatic stress syndrome, and it stays in their body because they can't allow it to go through. If you watch an animal goes through a period of running, fear, fighting, and so on, and goes through a whole thing and loses that energy and goes on with their life. Mm-hmm. We hold it in, and especially in the kinds of situations you're talking about. Tell us a bit about your parents and your relationship with them.
Well, my father was a world-famous psychiatrist, longtime chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at UCLA, and he and I actually had a pretty good friendship for such a relationship, for such a profession, and we were pals up until sort of, ironically, the last couple of years of his life. A bit of personal difficulty arose between us, which I talk about in the book, but it had cooled our relationship quite a bit, in fact. But when the news came that he was full of cancer and about to die, I kind of had to make a choice. So I was like, okay, do I continue to be a judge and jury
about the things that you were dealing with prior to that news?
Exactly. There comes a time when some things are more important than others, and other relatively piddling problems need to go aside. Some things are more important. Life and death matters are more important, and he was going through a life and death matter. He had just learned that he was full of cancer. He was going to die within a couple of months, and he wanted to know whether I was on board to help him should he need it. And I just sort of automatically said yes, of course.
Yeah, you described this scene in specific, the conversation you have, and that your response was, I think, you got it.
You got it. I mean, when the person arguably closest to your heart, your own parent, flesh of your flesh, or vice versa, needs that ultimate help, and it is ultimate, it's the last thing you're ever going to do. If you have any kind of a good relationship with them, I think your instinct is to say yes. Interestingly, if I had a family, a wife and kids, other people relying on me, that might have changed the equation. I might have said, I can't put myself at that risk. And that's another part of the problem of doing this on the quiet, because what happens if the person you're relying on begs off at the last minute or changes their mind or something like that?
And the other thing you're saying is that what about the person who says, yes, I'll do it, but cannot share what is most concerned to them with their wife or their husband?
Right, exactly.
And so now, I mean, we're getting into all the secrets, whether they're those secrets of incest and abuse that haunt people's families, or this kind of secret, very, very tough on intimacy, and the damage can be enormous.
It's a very complicated psychological combination of factors. And which makes all the more sense to take it out of the private realm, put it in the official medical realm. This is something that should be between a patient and their doctor, just like it is now in Oregon and Washington and Montana and Belgium, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, approximately.
Okay, let's go. When your dad asked you You would say in the book you were surprised. One, he didn't ask for help. Two, you'd been a bit estranged. But he asked you. You said, got it. What are your feelings then in the next few hours?
Well, right then, sort of stunned. I didn't really. I think in the book I say I'm not really sure what he said right after that, because my head was kind of buzzing with all this adrenaline of, oh my gosh, what's just happened here? My dad has said, I need you to assist me with my suicide. Are you on board? And I've said, yeah, I'm on board. And then, wait a minute. Wow. And there was so much going on, I think, that it just sort of flooded my synapses, and I was just for a while. And then there were all these complicated feelings. One of anxiety, fear already starting to build because I'm a lawyer. I know this is illegal. I've got to start thinking about that. Pride that my father would ask me for that help.
So in some sense, you have drawn closer at a moment when in 2 months he'll be gone.
Yeah, exactly. And we'd been friendly, we'd been cordial. We hadn't had the kind of relationship that some fathers and sons have. You go hunting together, fishing together,
But here, I'm saying the strength of this bond, alliance this is.
Exactly. This is, again, to use the very appropriate word, the ultimate kind of connection. And he was always such an autonomous person. He was this large physically and large personality and large ego and the top of his profession for decades and decades and decades. And to say to me, I need your help, I'm in trouble, these were words I'd never heard him say before to anybody. And so it was shocking on that level as well. And so I felt honored. I felt, and I felt proud of myself that I did have the balls to be able to man up and do this. As some people have pointed out in some of my other discussions, isn't it selfish of someone to ask that of you because it puts you in the jackpot? And I hadn't thought of that until they asked it, and I thought, probably yes, but when you're dying and in pain, I think you have the right to be selfish to a certain extent. The person you're asking has the right to say, no, I can't help you.
Yeah.
But I also felt I had an opportunity to take that next step in personal growth and what have you and say, yes, I'm going to do the hard thing, the right thing. Parenthetically, as I was writing the book and working through a lot of these issues, David Crosby came out with a new album, and the song on it that stuck with me and really helped me was Stand and Be Counted. And it essentially was his song about, hey, I'd kind of gotten relaxed about important social issues. I'm just watching the tube, whatever, and then I saw that Chinese boy in front of that tank, and I realized sometimes you have to stand and be counted. And I realized, that's what this is. This is me standing up and being counted. And as you said,
you had a life that was a law practice, a nice latte.
Yeah, exactly.
No family responsibilities.
No.
You had a pretty easy life, and suddenly it's wake up.
It was. I mean, I wasn't completely out of it socially.
I'm not saying that, but
no.
the difference.
Yeah,
the difference.
I mean, my practice was helping discriminated against employees with their employers. So I had a sort of a social conscious practice. But to go from that to this, which is really blood and guts. Virtually, literally. It was a real wake-up call.
That's the voice of John West. We're talking about his experiences that he recounts in his book, The Last Goodnights, assisting my parents with their suicides. And you're talking about the first one is your father.
Right.
Your father, it seems like, to me, is the simpler one because he has a death sentence.
Right.
And it's a quick one, and so it's not a question. I mean, it's just, will he have control of it and do it when he wants, or will he wait and suffer through it? Let's see if we can take us through the experience with your father and then deal with your mother. But I will just say your mother was Alzheimer's and debilitation and so on, but it wasn't nearly as clear-cut. So with your dad, now you've accepted the responsibility. How long is it from then until, as you in both cases you call it the plan?
Right.
How long does the plan last between that conversation and the night you assist him?
It was just a couple of months. It was in October, I believe, that he called me and up in Seattle and from here in L.A. and said, I'm full of cancer. I'm going to die. Almost that directly. And, of course, my mind was aflame with, oh, my goodness, what's going to happen to my mother, who already was starting to decline with her concerns, my sisters who had their own issues and troubles, and just, I mean, your father is dying. And he was only 73. I mean, he wasn't 90.
And a very powerful man. And as you say, he didn't learn about it until it was like 2 months away. So, this wasn't gradual.
He was a sturdy bear of a man, never was sick really, hardly at all. One day he went in, he had a lot of pain in his hip. He thought it was arthritis.
But so once he asks you, what goes on, again, this is so that someone who goes, my God, what would that be like?
Right.
What goes on in those 2 months?
Well, he told me he was dying, and oh my God, and then a couple of weeks later, I went to L.A. for his birthday, and we talked, and we sort of wrapped up some of the old problems. And then at Thanksgiving, he took me aside and said, look, I have some choices I want to make here, and I need you on board to help me. And that's when this all happened. So that was Thanksgiving, and he died. We executed the plan, to use another interesting word, right on the 2nd of January. So it was 6 weeks approximately. And it was a lot of sleepless nights for me, wondering, how's this going to happen? Where are we going to get the drugs? How am I going to keep from people seeing me? What about autopsy issues? And so I was researching medical stuff. I was researching legal stuff, complications, because his hip broke and he fell in the shower. To make a long story short, went into the hospital, decided to have hip replacement surgery, and people were wondering about that, and I was too. Why is he getting hip replacement surgery when he's dying of cancer? I finally figured it out. What he needed me for, really, to assist him with, was simply going to his medicine cabinet and getting the drugs, because he knew ahead of time that if he were immobile, in a hospital bed, riddled with cancer, maybe with broken bones, which happened, the hips, that he wouldn't be able to get to his stash. And he did have some kind of a stash, not really enough. He wasn't sure that he had everything he needed.
You tell in the book there are the sort of caper aspects.
Exactly.
Where you in the last couple of days, it happens to be, of course, right around New Year's,
and so
not everything's open,
exactly.
and you need one particular prescription to kind of be sure you've got enough, and you have your pitfalls with that.
Yeah.
But you're saying he needed you for mobility.
In a way, you could say in a way I was a glorified and hyper-stressed gopher. But this implicates the whole aspect of this issue, which is, what about disabled people, and what if they want help doing it? And, suicide is easy, but you have to kind of be able to move around. If you don't have muscle strength because of ALS or something, you can't
lift the glass to take the pills,
or you can't lift the gun if you're that desperate. It implicates all these sorts of issues. But at any rate, it was a kind of a mad, intense sprint emotionally for me, anxiety and, what's going to happen and how am I going to... But and in a way I'm grateful, because it just is like I was... He grabbed onto me and he was already sprinting, and so I was moving. I almost didn't have a chance to think about it. So it just zoom, 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 boom, and happened. And then I had to sort of deal with the fallout, and my mother and my sisters and, the colleagues and the family, the greater family, and et cetera, et cetera.
Your fear was, your greatest fear is about the legal situation, and how do we cover our tracks and make it look like he died in his sleep.
Well, my biggest fear for me was not going to prison.
Exactly.
Because the assisted suicide statute in California basically says, if you do this, you go to Folsom for 2 to 4 years. But my biggest fear for my father, and sort of the larger, more emotional fear, was, what if he doesn't take enough of the drugs? What if I don't get enough of this for him? What if we fail, quote unquote, which means that he's just in a coma, or they pump his stomach? What happens if the hospice nurse comes in the morning and he's labored breathing, and she calls 911 and they come and do all this? And then not only is he not getting what he wants, not only does he not get what he wants, which is a quick and painless death, But I get found out, perhaps, in terms of, there are all these drugs in his system. Where did he get them?
And then what else? He's dying anyway. He's going to die.
Exactly.
But suddenly the family, the sisters and your mother, are dealing with what's happening to you. And it's, I mean,
exactly.
As any listener can get, almost every stage in this story brings us back to the hardships. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk with you is just to, when you get it down to a personal story, you see that at every step of the way, it is harder on people that this is not legal and this is not, I mean, that whole fear that you have of what if we get halfway and he's so groggy, he took his Ambien a little early.
Right, exactly.
And so he was groggy, and yet he's got to keep swallowing. Well, what if he can't do it, and so he ends up, as you say, in some halfway state? If a medical professional is in charge of it, there's no problem there.
Exactly.
They
walk up
it.
and say, okay, everything is, all the papers are signed, everyone has said their goodbyes, it's an injection, and you go to sleep, and that's it.
I'm speaking with John West. We're talking about his experiences recounted in his book, The Last Goodnights, in which he tells how he assisted both of his parents with their suicides. The book came out about a year ago. Paperback is just out. Mm-hmm. As John told me before I went on the air, it's interesting that there's been a sudden flurry again of interest as there was when it first came out. But this is an issue that is not going away.
As I like to say, it's an issue that will not die.
That's right.
Anyone who's alive is going to die. So it behooves you to think a little bit about, do I want to cling to every last minute of bedridden, pain-riddled, brain-addled existence? Or maybe do I want to relax and have a dignified, peaceful end of my own choosing?
And as I shared with John before I went on the air, my own father passed away Ash Wednesday, from dust we are to dust we shall return, which was February 17th, so about 6 weeks ago. And I was the best piece of that was that he had a terminal cancer for 7 years and died of a heart attack quickly, without the worst suffering that was bound to come.
The lingering pain that was right out there.
And it would have been so much harder for my mother as well.
Yeah.
Let's shift to your mother, because that relationship is very different, and that situation was very different. And I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to tell the story.
Well, let's start with the old saw, which is a mother is a boy's best friend. And in my case, it really was true. My mom, Catherine West, a Ph.D., she was a psychologist. And she was a very smart woman, very savvy woman. And a very loving and caring woman. And she and I were very good pals. And she was afflicted with Alzheimer's. It had crept up on her a couple of years previous to this, and she was sort of in the early to middle stages of it. Her biggest problem was aphasia. She had trouble speaking, but she was very competent mentally. She really knew what was what. She knew a hawk from a handsaw. She was sharp. She knew what was what. And she had made no secret, neither of my parents had made any secret about their desire not to be medical basket cases at the end of their lives. They were medical people. They knew which side of the white lab coat they wanted to stay on. And a lot of medical people don't want to be lingering patients in hospitals or whatever, because they know how
right.
unpleasant it is. So she had said, even before my father died, that after he died, she didn't want to stay much longer.
And how much longer did she stay alive?
6 months.
6 months. And from the time that you and she had that not the conversation, the early conversation, but the conversation after your dad's death about the plan with her, you kind of looked ahead at about 6 months?
Yeah, well, it was about 5 or 6 months. Shortly after my father died, I explained to my mother what I had done and the help he'd gotten, and she was so relieved, because she had always thought she would help him or he would help her when the time came.
Right.
But neither of them had imagined that one or both of them would become disabled, which gets back to that aspect of things again. If the person you're relying upon for this can't do it for whatever other reason. At any rate, she was very relieved, and then she reiterated her desire to end her life on her own terms, and asked me for help, and I said okay. So I did, and from that point it was a regular, and I'm still living in Seattle, and she's in L.A., so I'm flying down to L.A. like every couple of weekends.
Every couple of weeks.
And checking in with her, how you doing? Do you still feel the same way? Making sure that her competence was still there and that her desire to do this was still there. And she always said yes. She always wanted to go. She didn't want to turn into a broccoli. She was a psychologist. She was a poet. Losing her mind was the cruelest form of torture. She called her condition torture. And who wants to be tortured to death?
But I do know that in this case, you in the book you make very clear, you rechecked and rechecked and rechecked because it was so different from...
Yeah, it was very different. And when the time came, I don't think I've ever seen anyone so brave. When you are otherwise physically healthy, she might still be physically alive today, but she kept taking those pills, and it was an amazing, bizarre, but powerful experience.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it at that. The book is The Last Goodnights, Assisting My Parents with Their Suicides. The website is thelastgoodnights.com. Thank you for sharing your story with us.